Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Policy Catalog Roadmap Stakeholder Call. This meeting stems from the Policy Initiatives Catalog and Roadmap Process Enhancement efforts from last year, and on behalf of the California ISO, my name is Brenda Kerner, and we invite you to this meeting we historically have maintained the catalog of potential policy initiatives submitted by you and your organization and stakeholders. This enhancement process aimed to improve the linkage between stakeholder input and these discretionary initiatives and the roadmap prioritization process. So today's meeting, we will have a lot of presentations, and we have a lot of folks here on the panelist group who we will be introducing as we move forward. But first, we have a few housekeeping reminders as this call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. If you do experience any technical issues during the meeting, feel free to send in a chat to my event producer, Candace, and myself, and we will help you. Great news about the Intellic platform. Now we do have the Call Me feature available and enabled, so you're able to use the dial-in phone line to access our calls. So that was integrated back to our own WebEx system, so we look forward to having those teleconferences work well today. For those asking a question, please raise your hand and use the raise hand icon located in the middle toolbar. Here you'll see on the bottom of your screen the raise hand icon, and then from there you'll be added to our queue. Make sure you don't unmute yourself while you're asking a question. It will be double muted at the time of your question. So those who are just logged in via audio only, press pound 2 on your device, and make sure for both all options today for asking a question, please state your full name and affiliation so we know who's speaking. At the same time, let's go ahead and kick things off with Jillian and her room right now. We can go ahead and do that. Jillian, just a quick audio check on here.
Good morning, Brenda.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And this is our sort of kickoff to the 2024 stakeholder process to develop our 2025, 6, and 7 roadmap. So this is the very beginning of this process. So you can see here on this timeline that we are here for this level setting stakeholder workshop. And we're looking forward to presenting you some food for thought as we get ready for what we really hope is the meat of the beginning of this process, which is your submissions into an annual catalog. We can go to the next slide. So our goal here today and throughout this process through this year is, really anchored in several goals that we've talked about before, but I think bear reiterating. First and foremost is to meaningfully engage stakeholders. We want to make sure that we integrate your priorities into the overall policy roadmap, from all stakeholders and from the RIF Roundtable, who we'll hear from the RIF representative later on in this presentation. We want to make sure that we're being transparent and be clear about our how we prioritize the proposals that you submit. We want to make sure that the prioritization process and incorporating stakeholder input is also just aligned with our internal planning processes. We have a lot of mandates, and so we want to make sure that we are clear with everyone about the constraints that we face, and making sure that we are incorporating stakeholder priorities into that. We want to be very focused in our scope. Sarah Garcia is going to talk to us a bit more about the ISO strategic objectives and how submissions should fall under that rubric. And then we also just need to be mindful that, of course, as you well know, there are urgent requests that come up during the year, whether from stakeholders or from within the ISO, or regulatory mandates that require us to be nimble when it comes to our prioritization process and, have some room in there for things that, come up. Brenda, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So, you know, in the past, we've had this giant catalog that has been a cumulative sort of holding place for all of these initiatives that stakeholders have submitted. But what we really want to do with this process that we are kicking off right this minute is to make sure that we reflect in an annual catalog what is really pressing for stakeholders right now. And so we want to ask for your forbearance a little bit, because there's going to be some growing pains and it's a bit of work to put on your shoulders, but we really want you to potentially resubmit things you've submitted that rise to the highest priority for you. And we want to make sure that the annual catalog really reflects what's important to you so that we can respond to that in this process. And then, as I mentioned before, we're really focused on making sure that we are explaining to you, and you have the full benefit of the transparency that we are trying to align the prioritization efforts with stakeholder input, with the ISO constraints as well, including our strategic objectives, the enterprise roadmap, which is really our internal near-term planning, budget and resources. We're juggling all those things the same way you are, and we want to make sure that we're transparent about that. We can go to the next slide. With having said all that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sarah Garcia, who's going to really walk through the strategic plan, which is the umbrella for the policy roadmap, and I think will be a great framing exercise for your submissions and kind of ground this whole process. So with that, I'll turn over to Sarah.
All right, thanks, Jillian. And can you give me a verbal confirmation that my audio is good?
We can hear you.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, thanks for having me. I'm Sarah Garcia, and I oversee the strategic planning process here at the ISO, and have done so for 9 years. And I've been invited here to share the ISO strategic goals. And I think, you know, just as a level setting, the reason why that's really important is because with this latest strategic plan, we've really adopted it as our central organizing principle. So this really is, you know, sort of foundation for the most critical work that we think is necessary in this time frame, which was 2022 through 2026. And the plan for today's discussion is that I share these strategic goals with you, which would then be used by you in developing future policy requests. And that would be a data point that we could reference and you could reference to determine, at least in part, whether your request is aligned with our priorities. And these are our priorities here in the strategic plan. I also want to note that we are a mission-driven public service entity, and our strategy is designed to be mutually beneficial in helping you achieve yours. So, you know, just a sort of anecdotal note on that, when we were developing this plan, we looked at the mission and vision statements of many of you, and we all share common language around reliability, cost efficiency, and environmental sustainability. So we have that in common, and I think this strategic plan is how we think we at the California ISO move forward in achieving or maintaining that mission or vision. I'm going to go to the next slide here and to let you know that our strategic plan is contained out on our website, and there's a link in, I think, the About Us or Our Commitments subpage. But page 3 contains our highest level strategic objectives. And I'll go through them at this high level first, but we'll provide some greater detail in the slides that follow. So our first objective is to reliably and efficiently integrate new resources by proactively upgrading operational capabilities. Second is to strengthen resource adequacy and meet California's SB 100 goals through long-term transmission planning and effective coordination with state agencies. Third objective is to build on the foundation of the Western energy imbalance market to further expand Western market opportunities. Fourth is our objective to provide highly responsive and inclusive stakeholder engagement and customer service. And fifth is our objective to create a flexible and adaptive work environment that retains and attracts a highly skilled and engaged workforce. I'll give you a few minutes to process all of that language, or seconds, actually, a few seconds. All right, so promise next 5 slides contain greater detail for each objective. I'm not going to read these to you like I did in the last slide. I'll just pause and give you a moment to read through. All right, now this is high-level detail, but I invite you, especially as you develop your own policy request, to reference the slide deck and the strategic plan itself. Each of these items has additional narratives that includes problem statements and proposed solutions. I guess here's my request for all of you. We don't have all the answers or even the best answers, but one of you might. So this is where policy requests could play a pivotal role in helping the ISO. And of course, if you're submitting it, it would be helping you as well. So that's what we're talking about when we say mutually beneficial solutions. And that's my pitch for strategy ideas. So I'd like to see what you have if you've got some unique or good, interesting ideas that we haven't really thought of that help us with reliability. So anyhow, that's the plug. All right, moving on. This is our greater detail for the second strategic objective, and I'll give you a moment to read through this. All right, so here you would really be submitting policy requests that impact our transmission planning, interconnection processes, and also resource adequacy could support this strategy. A lot of our work in that space is in advocacy, but if you have design or policy changes that affect us here, we'd love to hear about it. All right, these are our market strategies. I also think this is the area where most of the policy requests come in. So I'll give you a few extra seconds to read through this one. And then my tip here is that policy requests that impact EDAM, market efficiency, or enable the participation of emerging technologies should reference this strategy. Let's take a look at Objective 4. A lot of slide or text on this slide, so I'll give you all some time to read through. So here, policy requests that impact transparent access to information where appropriate, meaning it's not protected by confidentiality, and information accuracy should reference the strategy. I don't see a lot of policy requests coming in to change our customer service processes, but you know, we'll take it if you have it. And then let's go to slide 5. Again, I don't see policy requests coming in on our workforce, but for posterity, I'll show you this and let you read it. And also, it is a good segue to my next topic. So, you know, opportunities for stakeholders to shape strategy. So when we were developing this strategic plan, we conducted a review and feedback sessions with many customers and stakeholders. And one recurring piece of feedback was to express support for this goal. These feedback sessions were held in late 2021 and early 2022, right before we published the strategic plan, which was a time when many employees were quitting their jobs, and the ISO was noticeably hit by that. We lost a lot of good people, and you noticed and mentioned it. A lot of support for this, but I don't see policy requests coming in to affect it. Well, let's move on to my next topic here, which is why we're all here. What opportunities do stakeholders have to shape ISO strategy? Well, my first response is you always have the opportunity. It's continuous, right? We learn from you. Your needs drive our priorities, but formally, there are two opportunities. First is when we are developing the strategy, we do conduct review and feedback sessions and seek and incorporate the feedback that we receive. They're conducted by me and my team to foster candid feedback. So if you get a meeting invite from me in 2026, please accept it. This is what we're doing. And we leave the officers and our senior leadership off the calls intentionally. We want you to tell us if we're on the wrong track. And there's some concern that you may not be as forthright telling Elliot or others that the strategy is not adequate. So we want to make sure that you feel comfortable speaking up. And the second request is these policy requests. And this is why we're all here, but this is brand new. But the hope is that these policy requests will help us achieve our strategic objectives, as well as meet other gating criteria to be discussed later in this presentation. But that information will flow in and be folded into our strategic planning process. So that's what I have for you. I'll take questions if you have them.
Thank you, Sarah. So we are receiving a few chat questions. Feel free to look those over. But as a reminder, please use the raise hand icon to ask a question or state any feedback for today. And then also feel free to submit them through chat. We will review them as we go. So would you like us to read that one?
I'm reading Kathleen Colbert's. Give me a sec here.
Yeah, no worries. But yeah, we did send out those links out to the strategic plan for those who want to see it on the PDF version on the website. It's on the KYSA website, so feel free to look at that over the chat. You can go over those pages as well that we went through today. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, Kathleen, thanks for the question. We'll certainly take this under advisement. It's a departure from this entire presentation, so I don't think I could answer that for you today, but thank you for the recommendation.
All right, Sarah, I don't see any questions in queue. Would you like to go to the next slide?
Sure.
Oh, wait, Sarah, we do have Kathleen's hand raised. Let's go ahead and unmute Kathleen from Vistra. Go ahead, Kathleen, your line's unmuted.
Great, thanks. No, since you referred to my chat, no one else can see it. That felt super cryptic. I will. It's okay. Okay, so I'll bring it up. Anyway, Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. I sent the panelists just a short note as Sarah was talking through some of these strategic objectives that aren't policy related, but that were more about like process improvements, Objective 4 and Objective 5, but specifically Objective 4, because Sarah, you threw out, you've never seen a catalog item about like customer service improvements, et cetera, and I just was noting that that's because we communicate that to our engagement managers. That kind of feedback goes through them, and I just want to be mindful of that relationship is really important to the customer service life cycle, you know, between us, the customers, and our engagement managers, and they do a fabulous job. But we do give that feedback on the stuff for Objective 4, if you want to go back to that strategic objective, just so folks can put it into. So provide a highly responsive and inclusive stakeholder engagement and customer service. providing all that feedback and all those requests go through our engagement managers. I'm sure that they have a list of things that they themselves are kind of moving through the CAISO and what they think are the strategic objectives with this. I think it's not a bad idea to be transparent about that. I mean, for one part, it would really acknowledge all the work that that team does to improve and further this objective. And it does relate to policy work. It's just the practical aspect of how do we make policy work practically feasible, doable, what's the workload, how's it done, how do we engage? That stuff is important. I just wanted to note that it's not a catalog process. It's really what customer service is there for.
Okay, thank you, Kathleen, understood. And I guess I'll volley back to you and ask you, is there a question in there for me in addition to the idea that you've submitted? It's not, I'll just tell you, it's not one that we've considered as folding into this process. So that's pretty much the only answer I have for you.
Yeah, no, Sarah, there was no question. You brought it up as encouraging people to submit those kinds of requests to the catalog process. I'm on the same page. This is not the process for these, and I'm trying to clarify that it should go through our customer service reps.
All right, thank you.
Great question. All right, Sarah, you're on slide 16. Take it away.
Actually, Brenda, that's a slide for me. But thank you, Sarah, for being here today. And I'll just check if there are any other questions on the California ISO strategy before we move on to the next part of the presentation today.
Do we have any questions in the audio line, Candace, just to double check?
No questions at this time.
Okay, hearing none, thank you, Sarah. As a follow-up to the last conversation we had, participation in the process that we're going to outline today is really part of a portfolio of actions that are available to you, the stakeholders of this California ISO WEIM market, to really participate in that market and in the design of that market. You can, as Kathleen suggested, contact customer service directly. If you are an active participating member of this market, you can submit a city ticket. There are also market performance calls that are hosted by the ISO on a regular basis, which are available to regulators and other interested parties that may not be market participants. And we definitely encourage you to participate in all of those. I also want to highlight a few of the existing stakeholder processes, which are already rolling today. These are listed on the 2023-2025 roadmap, and there's a link to that presentation on slide 16. But they include things like day-ahead resource sufficiency. So if that is where your interest lies, you should participate directly in that process. We have a number of working groups: price formation enhancements, greenhouse gas coordination working group, gas resource management working group, and a resource adequacy working group. There's been some discussion in each of those working groups about whether or not there need to be market design changes. We will reach out to the leaders of those working groups and coordinate some of this policy catalog process with them. But I'd suggest to you that if an issue is particularly relevant or particularly important to you, or to the group that you represent, that you submit that also directly in the stakeholder catalog process. The fact that it has been raised in a working group is sort of additional support for the interest in that particular item. We are opening a window, and I will, if I have control of the slides, go back here. I do. Dangerous to give me control of the slides too far. Yeah.
Actually, you're seeing the switch, but no one is seeing it. Which slide did you want to go back to?
I want slide 5. Thank you. Thank you, Candace. There we go. This is actually the 2024 Policy Initiatives Catalog and Roadmap process, which, apologies for the typo, but the thing I wanted to spend a little bit of time on is the calendar. We are here today having a level-setting stakeholder workshop. This is really to outline the process and encourage you to participate. As much participation as we can have, we welcome. There will be a window for stakeholders to submit potential discretionary initiatives. That window will be open in February. There should be a template posted today for those submissions, and Alyssa will be walking you through some of what that looks like. Could you go back to the slide? Thank you. There will be, following the open submission window, a Regional Issues Forum roundtable, and Meg McNall is here today to talk a little bit about that and how the RIF fits into this process. Following, I see the hand, Callie, and I'll get to you in a minute, but as we walk through this process, I want to assure you that we will be as open with stakeholders as we can be. We will share draft catalogs in between these steps, and we will share with you how we are prioritizing initiatives. Ultimately, we're looking for you to participate in that prioritization as we walk through this, and that is the purpose of the stakeholder prioritization workshop, which we will be holding in April.
Amelia, can I just add one thing real quick? This is Jillian. I wanted to add that, you know, if you provide a submission to the annual catalog process, we would be, you know, excited to hear from you. Honestly, presentations explaining to us and to the rest of the stakeholder community through these prioritization workshops your case for that initiative. We want to make sure that, you know, it's aired and we've all had a chance to think about it and weigh in on it. So that would be part of that prioritization workshop process. Thank you for letting me jump in.
Absolutely. There is, between sort of this May time when the final annual catalog is published and the September time when we go to the draft policy roadmap, there's some time in that period to really take comments on this process itself. So I'd ask you also for the favor of your attention to how this process is going. Our goals, as I think Sarah spoke to earlier, are really to get as much honest feedback from stakeholders about what changes are important to you, where you want us to go. That feedback will be collected and will be shared both back to the strategy as well as into the policy roadmap creation process moving forward. So genuinely very much appreciate that. If you notice places where there's some friction or inefficiencies along the way, please do keep track of that and feel free to let us know.
Amelia, I'm going to add one thing, if I may. I think, you know, we have this timeline laid out, but one of the things we're going to learn about as we go through this is, you know, if our timeline is quite right. So wanted to flag for you specifically if you are finding that parts of this are too fast or languishing or mismatched with your internal processes, you know, timeline considerations that are important to us. We laid this out because it represents our best thinking of what would work, but this is our first time through, and so we'll be evaluating the timeline, how it works for us, but we want to know how it works for you as well.
Exactly. And with that, I see a hand up from Callie Wells.
Callie, your line is open.
Yeah, this is Carla. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you now, yes.
Okay, great. Hi, how are you doing? So I had a quick question on something you said earlier as this new policy or this new catalog process relates to the working groups that have already been ongoing. So our understanding of the working groups, that the GHG, the price formation, and the RA was the working group phase was to gain consensus on problem statements and issues that would be addressed in policy efforts. So the idea, at least in my mind, was once those working groups get to that point where there's consensus on the problem statements, it would naturally flow into a formal policy process to address those issues. But I thought I heard you say that that's not necessarily the case, that for any of those issues to be picked up by the CAISO in a policy process, that we would have to submit them into this catalog. Am I understanding that right? So that for any of those issues that we've been talking about for the past couple of months, we actually need to formally submit them?
No, let me be a little clearer about that, and if you could go back to, I think it's slide 16. Sorry for the bouncing around here. There we go. There is a path for issues raised in the working groups to become stakeholder processes without being submitted to the catalog. This open period to submit something into the catalog is just a month. It's only February. And next year it'll be also February. So as Jillian presented earlier, there has to be a way to deal with emerging issues. Those could be emerging issues that develop in the market, or it could be something that comes up in one of these working groups that really needs to be dealt with haste. Our request is that, to the degree possible, requests for market design changes can be made in the annual catalog process. That allows us to take requests from one entity and match them with requests that come from somebody else. That also allows us to put all of these requests in relative priority and really throw that open to stakeholders for them to decide what's the most important to work on. So it's a more transparent process, it's a more open process, but it's an annual process. Does that make sense, Kelly?
I just wanted to confirm that all the issues that we've been talking about in those 3 working group processes to date are going to have a pathway forward to naturally then flow into an actual policy process without having to be also submitted into this catalog process. So it sounds like that is still the case. I just, for whatever reason, heard that maybe that wasn't the case, and I just wanted to confirm.
That's right, Callie. I mean, we're obviously looking carefully at what's coming out of the working group processes. We want to make sure that all of that is reflected in this annual catalog. The goal is really, as just to underscore what Amelia said, is to have a robust annual catalog that really reflects what is percolating to the surface as priorities for stakeholders. And to the extent that those come out of the working groups, I think they will naturally flow into the catalog process. We will try to get them there. We encourage you to put them there. It doesn't hurt to have them come from multiple angles. That's actually great. It underscores the importance of them. But, you know, this is really part of the recognition that, you know, needed, wanted policy initiatives come to the ISO through multiple venues, and we don't want to miss anything. I think that's really what we're talking about here. So we want to make sure that they end up in that catalog. We want that catalog to be the one repository that represents the suite of things that we need to think about in forming our prioritization for that 3-year roadmap.
And let me just put that in a slightly different way also. Is like, I would think about the roadmap and the catalog as being a bigger platform. Mm-hmm. If you're participating in a working group, and that working group comes up with a recommendation that the ISO start a stakeholder process around a particular issue that arose in the working group, that is the voice of the working group leading to that stakeholder process starting. If you also participate in this process, it can really be the voice of the community of stakeholders that participate in the California ISO. And that would allow that desire or that demand or that need to be potentially reflected in the ISO's future strategy in a way that won't happen as easily if it stays limited to the working groups.
We're going to talk in a minute about the RIF roundtable and their input into this process as well. There may well be, and I would actually expect that most of the input that we get from the RIF will be, you know, a lot of the same things that we hear from the broader stakeholder community. It's okay for it to be duplicative. That's great. We're trying to cover all bases and make sure that we hear all of that input.
With that,
I just want to make sure we're not losing momentum on those working groups.
Yeah.
Because there's a prioritization process to prioritize issues within each of them separately. So I'm just trying to make sure we don't lose momentum on that one. So thanks.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, Kelly. With that, I hear the demand for a break. I think we've got one more question in the queue, and then if we could switch to the presentation from the RIF, and I promise you all a break after that. But we'll take the question in the queue.
We actually have 4 hands that are raised right now.
All right, exciting.
Hi, I think I'm unmuted. This is Renee Steichen with Rev Renewables. My question is, I guess, similar but different to Callie's in that specifically for the ones in the roadmap that have not yet started, you know, I'm thinking of storage in particular. There's a couple storage initiatives that are on the calendar for 2024, but nothing has been scoped out for those yet. And so what I'm hearing is that we should not wait for that, and that we should put any sort of proposals that we have into this catalog process as well. I mean, I know working with others in the storage community, there's a lot of things that we would like to have worked on, and so that this is the place to put them. Is that correct?
Absolutely. You're nodding. You're really excited.
That's absolutely correct.
Yes. The more the better, and the more detail, and you know, we want that those. Please don't take for granted things that have been on past roadmaps or in past iterations of the catalog as you know, already submitted. Please make your submissions and let us know what's important to you, and consider this like a hard refresh. This process is a hard refresh, and we want you then to take that open canvas and help us fill it.
And for what we put together for the comments, and then I'm trying to remember the slide you were on before with, you know, kind of presenting it. So for the comment process, we don't have to have like it fully baked at that point. Right now we can, you know, kind of lay out the outline of it and then maybe present it in more detail at the April meeting?
Correct. Yes, that is correct. Alyssa, at the end of this presentation, is going to go through what's actually required to make a submission, and it's very open-ended. I'd suggest if something's already on the 2023 to 2025, or it's been mentioned in a workshop or something else like that, that you please do note that in your submission and make sure that we're tying all the different pieces together.
And in terms of how big it is, I think oh, sorry, want to go ahead?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think, you mentioned how big things are. I don't want, oh, I don't feel like I have the data behind it. I don't feel like I've got it, soup to nuts all figured out to be a deterrent to submitting it. We expect a range of bakedness for your submissions, and that's great. That's perfect. And maybe some things that are submitted will need a working group to figure out how, to bake them some more. Yeah, I wanted to draw out that point that you were making.
Okay. And just one more question as I'm seeing this slide is, I'm seeing the final roadmap isn't published until December, although the final catalog is published in May. So I'm just thinking about, the timing for working on things, things that we think are urgent that need to start now before summer, for example, whether those are going to have to wait until May when the final catalog is published, or I guess when would initiatives that come out of this process actually potentially start? For example, I think the storage ones that are on the current calendar or roadmap for starting in 2024, obviously we would hope they would start, in Q1, Q2 at the latest, and not wait until, Q3 or 4 when these roadmaps are published.
Yeah, I would encourage you still to submit them. We will take note. Please do note on your submission. It's very important to us that this be in place for, say, summer 2024. If that's the case, we will collect your feedback along with others and pass that on appropriately to the people who could actually potentially add that to an existing stakeholder process.
And work is not stopping. It's not that we're not going to start anything until 2025. There is a storage initiative planned to start very soon. So, I don't want you to feel like this is a giant pause. There still is work ongoing, but of course, if, and this is why, we were careful to flag urgent requests early on in this presentation, as we understand that things come up prior to summer, things come up that are regulatory requirements, and so we do need to be nimble, and I think you make a great point in that regard.
Great, thank you.
Is there another question in the queue?
Yeah, we do have Chris. Go ahead, Chris.
Hello,
sorry, Colin Smith.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. This is Colin Smith from LEAP. I just want to ask a quick question on timeline since you requested feedback on that. And the question is just the difference in time between draft and final catalogs and then draft and final roadmap. Is there a reason it's only 1 month for the catalog and 3 months for the roadmap? Is that just because the roadmap is a much longer and more involved document? Wondering if you could shed some light on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. There is a big jump in time there, and that's reflective of a lot of internal work that goes on with our, and I'm going to throw out some wonky words, our enterprise roadmap that goes on to plan out in very intricate detail for the upcoming year for the ISO, including just what humans are needed to do what work, not only related to policy initiatives, but all the other changes and improvements that go on our side. So that timeline is reflective of that coordination internally. Amelia, did you want to speak more to that?
I just add that part of what the roadmap includes are non-discretionary initiatives, which we have. The annual catalog is a catalog of the discretionary initiatives. If you request something that we have to do because of a regulatory requirement or something else, we will definitely pay attention to that, but it's at that point not discretionary, and it moves into a different category. So that's the other difference between the two. Is there another question in the queue?
Hi, this is
Yes.
Dan Williams from the Energy Authority. I think, am I up next?
Hi, we can hear you, Dan.
Great, thanks. Well, I joined a little bit late, so maybe missed an opportunity to congratulate Amelia on coming over to this side of the party. Good to see you. But I just wanted to kind of maybe take things a little different direction and ask types of thoughts in another area, and that's just kind of given this reset and focus on prioritizing and kind of laying out the tariff level policy development. Is there an opportunity here to talk about how we can kind of lean into and leverage the BPM change management process and propose revision request pathway for getting or initiating some important changes, or looking at areas that we can maybe address business practices and things that are happening in the market that may be ripe for changes but don't require a tariff change to get that affected. I'm thinking, for example, like some of Order 831 changes and offer cap related changes that folks may be looking at may require a tariff change. Some may just be looking at different ways to update some of the BPM language, processes that are used, that sort of thing that fit within the existing tariff authority. And I'm just wondering if the ISO's kind of looked at trying to invigorate the BPM change process while recognizing the need to do some of this overhaul work on the catalog and the tariff directed changes.
Yeah, thanks Dan for the question. I think it points to a needed clarification. We're including those BPM only changes in this process as well. So we really do welcome, if you have a request to change something in the BPM, it would still require a stakeholder process. It might require some, however, a shorter stakeholder process if it doesn't require a tariff change, because those BPM process changes can be made without the same level of involvement from our board and authorization from the board to make those tariff changes, and then they don't need to be submitted and approved by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So it's a shorter process, but I would still include them in the discretionary initiative catalog.
Right, and as pointed out here on Amelia's slide earlier, those certainly can go through city as well, but again, we appreciate having them, submitted. We're not trying to make work by having you submit things in multiple venues. Please understand that our overarching goal is to be thorough and make sure that we capture what are your priorities.
Exactly.
So I find that a bit both good from the standpoint of it's good to get a holistic kind of run through of everything that folks are looking at that are focused on changes that they'd like to see in the market. But the PRR process is run through the BPM change management process, and is, at least I've always thought of it as a much more like targeted and expedited way to deal with things that stakeholders see need to be addressed. So are you still viewing that as a pathway, but maybe it just depends on how comprehensive the BPM changes might be?
Yeah, I think, Dan, you nailed it. This is Jillian, sorry. And I'm just jumping in because I was shaking my head so fervently that I thought I better speak. I think you're exactly right. I mean, I think that is a great process. It's a well-tread path. It's very effective. But there might be, big changes that are required for BPM don't rise to the level of a tariff change, but still require stakeholdering and a lot of effort on our part as well as yours. They might require system changes, and those definitely rise to the level of the catalog. So I think, you know, you touched on that nuance, and I think that's exactly right.
Okay, and then the last thing I want to mention is just kind of maybe your thoughts on pathways for when stakeholders see the need for some investigation, or that's a loaded word, sorry to use with the next DMM person. It's some additional you know, research or review of like market outcomes as a pathway into having some discussion about future changes. And so I'm thinking about like the process that we went through for some of the summer readiness changes a few years ago that came out of reviewing the market outcomes in summer 2020 and 2021. How should stakeholders look at kind of bringing something similar to the ISO in the future if we don't already see you picking it up to say, hey, we saw kind of over a period of a weekend or a few weeks some interesting results, and we think there's something there, but we really need to get more in looking into it from the ISO in order to kind of see what we should even be looking at to propose goes into the catalog or heads towards a BPM change.
Yeah, thanks Dan for the question. I'd suggest that something that comes out of looking at a particular market result, the appropriate place to bring that up in the discussion is in the ISO's market performance call on that subject. There's a call every other week called the market update call, and I think if you're seeing something that looks anomalous, that's one of the first places to go. There are quarterly market MPPF, which is the
Market Performance and Planning Forum.
And you can always participate in those. If you see, putting my DMM hat back on for a second, if you see behavior that you believe is nefarious in some way or could be or requires investigation, you can submit that in an online form on the market monitoring website. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission also has their own form, and you can submit it there. And the folks at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission or DMM will take a second look at that.
And of course, city, of course.
And of course, as you know, as was mentioned actually at the very beginning of this call by Kathleen, you should participate with your customer service representative or through city if you're representing a market participant. If you're coming to the market as a on the outside in some way, then I think the best way is to participate in the public market review sessions.
Good, and I'll have to make sure to strike the word investigation from all future comments that I make. Focus on other, get out the thesaurus to think about what I mean for researching and reviewing market outcomes there. But thank you. That I think that helps kind of fill in some of the gaps here. And while we're, you know, having to prioritize some of the big picture work, I think it's important to kind of keep a focus on maybe some of the more expedient pathways for looking into some things. So thank you.
I'll just follow up before we take the next question with a note back to Sarah's presentation of the ISO's goals. I think it's goal 4, but one of the strategic goals is really to provide the kind of data access and transparency that market participants and those interested in the market need to really understand the market and answer any questions that you have. So if you have particular challenges in understanding the market or getting access to data or getting answers to your questions, that's a little bit meta, but you could actually submit a request for that in this catalog process itself. So not the particular question, but the larger question of needing to get an answer to that sort of question. That, if we could take the next question.
Hey there, Amelia. I don't see any more questions in queue, but I did send you a note about one of the chat questions, so feel free to look over that first. Do we have any questions in audio, Candace?
Not at this time.
All right, with that.
Is there a question from Roseanne at Gridwell or Rayanne?
No. No.
Okay. Okay.
With that, if we could pivot over to the presentation from Riff, and thank you all for your patience and time today, and thank you, Meg, for your participation today. Really appreciate it.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity on behalf of the RIF to join this important conversation about the 2024 process. My name is Meg McNull, and I'm here in my capacity as a sector liaison to the Western Energy Imbalance Markets Regional Issues Forum from the CAISO PTO sector, and I currently serve as vice chair of the RIF. I'm going to be talking a little bit today about the process that the RIF will be using to, and if we can go to the next slide, please, actually, the process that the RIF will be using this year to implement a new step in the catalog and roadmap process. And that's what we've been referring to throughout this meeting as the RIF Roundtable. And just to give a little bit of background regarding what the roundtable is and why we're doing it, this is a process that really has its origins in the Western EIM Governance Review Phase 3 process that culminated in a final proposal approved in 2023. And part of that process included an array of changes to governance, including to implement the currently effective joint authority model. But one aspect that was addressed in the Governance Review Committee's final proposal was the role and sort of type of stakeholder engagement that we have within the EIM specifically. And there was various stakeholder feedback that was provided on the topic of stakeholder engagement with CAISO policy initiatives. And where the Governance Review Committee's final proposal landed was that the RIF should take steps to implement what's been termed as a roundtable discussion to kick off the CAISO's annual policy roadmap process. And the idea with the roundtable is that it is intended to be a facilitated discussion of stakeholder priorities that the CAISO would then take and consider in formulating its roadmap processes for addressing issues of importance to the EIM. And as outlined in the final proposal, the concept is that your stakeholders, sector liaisons, would engage in a discussion, having done some research ahead of time and discussed with sectors on an individual basis, but would share information at the roundtable, specifying policy priorities and preferences of the various sectors. So just taking an example that's come up during today's meeting, we heard a representative from Rev Renewables discuss a variety of, or the fact that the storage community has a variety of policy ideas and proposals that they would like to see the CAISO consider. Those types of policy priorities would be the perfect thing to communicate to your sector liaison for discussion during the RIF roundtable so that we can have what the Governance Review Committee termed a give and take among stakeholders about different priorities. And the idea is to try and develop some consensus around the stakeholder community within the EIM to help the ISO identify what's a high priority for stakeholders, what's a key issue, where do we need to be looking to put resources in the coming years as far as the policy initiative process. The governance review committee, as far as process, was rather open-ended in terms of how this roundtable conversation would take place, and the RIF liaisons have been thinking about how that will work. As with the ISO's new policy initiative and roadmap process, it is a bit of a work in progress. And so if we can just go to the next slide. We are holding our first, I'm skipping to the third bullet point here, but we are holding our first roundtable meeting on March 18th. The meeting will take place at the ISO's offices with a remote participation option. So the hope is to have this as a hybrid meeting, and we'd love to have as much in-person participation at this meeting as possible to allow for a full and complete discussion. In terms of process and backing up a little bit, we talked a bit at the RIF meeting in September and also in December about approaches to the roundtable, and those conversations were pretty high level. And obviously we're having our level setting meeting today, and the CAISO has showed where the roundtable really fits within their process for preparing not just the policy initiatives roadmap, but the catalog. So the way I think about this is that there's sort of a two-pronged process. One is to put together the catalog, and that has consisted historically of a list of different ideas that stakeholders have for policy initiatives. And then the roadmap is pulling from that catalog and talking about how are we actually going to implement these, what timeline, what set of priorities are we going to use, what are we going to tackle first. So the timing of the RIF roundtable is really great because it will allow for us to talk in March about not just what we think the roadmap should look like going forward, but it will also allow for a discussion about the catalog. And as you can see, I think the catalog is intended to be finalized in the May timeframe. I will add that I don't think, as we've heard, the ISO has a very robust process to collect stakeholder feedback for what will go into the catalog. And if stakeholders are submitting proposals in the February process, I would really encourage you to be communicating those proposals to your RIF sector liaisons, again, to allow for a really full and complete discussion at the RIF of what your policy ideas are. And if we can go ahead to the next slide. So the liaison group as a whole is viewing stakeholder input as essential to a successful RIF roundtable, and the RIF liaisons would like to hear from the stakeholder community regarding what your policy priorities are. If your sector liaisons have not contacted you already, they will be reaching out to you very soon. Again, with the goal of understanding what your individual stakeholder sector priorities are in 2024 and looking out into the longer term. We're also very interested in feedback on potential improvements to the catalog or roadmap process, so that I think we've talked before, both in ISO stakeholder meetings regarding the catalog, and we've mentioned this during RIF meeting discussions. You know, I think there's a wide interest in making sure that the catalog in particular is a really kind of a living, breathing document. And if we have initiatives that are addressed through one of the multiple other forums that the ISO has discussed early in this meeting, such as through the working group process or a BPM change, for example, you know, we're not sort of keeping that obsolete set of priorities in the catalog, but it can be updated on a regular basis so that it is a useful document for stakeholders and for the ISO. The RIF is also really interested in suggestions about process for how to conduct the roundtable, how we can facilitate sector participation in the roundtable discussion by individual stakeholders, whether that's, you know, stakeholders communicating up through their liaisons or opportunities for direct participation. And I should also note that going back, we don't need to move back there, but I did want to make sure that I mentioned that there is also an opportunity for a representative from the EIM body of state regulators to participate in the roundtable discussion as well, and we hope to take advantage of that. So just in closing, and I'm happy to answer questions, obviously, but if you are not familiar with the RIF, or if you are unfamiliar with the roundtable process and would like to understand more, or you have input to provide for the roundtable meeting on March 18th, please reach out to your sector liaisons. I have a link here where you can find out who that is or where your sector liaison's contact information is located. We encourage, again, stakeholders to be in touch with the liaison group if you have thoughts regarding how the roundtable should be conducted, or if you want to talk more about your policy priorities. If you are not sure who your sector liaison is, you can reach out to me, or you can reach out to Josh Walter, who is with Seattle City Light, and he is currently serving as the RIF chair, and our contact information is at that link as well. And with that, I'm happy to take questions. And I hope to see, I see that we have a large number of stakeholders on the meeting today. I would welcome and certainly hope to see wide participation at the roundtable in March. And I see there's one question from Kathleen Colbert. Hi, Kathleen.
Yeah, no, thanks, Meg. Kathleen Colbert from FISTRA. Also one of the sector liaisons that Meg is talking about for the IPP and marketer sector. Meg, thank you for your constant leadership on this group and for doing this presentation and briefing. I just wanted, and you largely covered it, but if you don't mind, I just want to make an appeal that it is not too late to join a sector. So I know, Meg, you're saying like reach out, find out who who your sector rep is, but if you haven't joined a sector, I just wanted to make an open call for every single market participant, every single person on this call fits into a sector. So I think that's been a bit confusing for some folks in the past. So I wanted just to throw that out, see if you want to react to that and kind of re-emphasize, but I just really want to encourage everyone to join a sector if you haven't already and get your feedback in.
Yeah.
Thanks, Meg.
No, I couldn't have said it better. Again, if you don't know where you fit, you can get in touch with me. You can get in touch with Josh, with Kathleen, and we'll help you figure out what sector you should belong to. And again, it's incredibly important. The RIF is the RIF's most successful when we have active stakeholder engagement. I do not see any other participants in the queue.
Candace, do you have any more questions in audio only? Can you double check for us? Thank you.
There are no questions at this time.
Okay, with that, Brenda, I think we're probably ready for a break before we move on to the nuts and bolts of the submission process. I think this is a good time for us to stretch our legs and grab some water.
So we will return in 5 minutes.
I think 5 minutes, yeah.
Which would be 10:18. Thank you very much everybody who's been participating today. Please do stick around to find out exactly how to submit something.
Ooh, that's a good teaser. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, thanks everybody, and a huge thanks to Meg for the presentation on RIF today. Go ahead. Brenda, are we ready to kick off the conference again?
Yes, we are. Just double checking on my audio here.
You're coming through clearly.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Amelia. Go ahead. We're on slide 18.
I'll hand it off to Alyssa to walk through the process.
All right, thanks, Amelia. I'm going to spend the next couple of slides walking through the process for stakeholders to submit discretionary policy initiatives for the 2024 catalog. Like Jillian spoke to earlier this morning, we're starting fresh with the 2024 catalog. The goal is to have entries that are a little bit more relevant and reflect current stakeholder priorities. So instead of accepting submissions on a rolling basis throughout the year, we're going to be accepting discretionary initiatives once a year. And like we mentioned, that is going to be next month, the month of February. And the goal here is just to give us a little bit more time to conduct a proper prioritization process and really incorporate the priority initiatives into the annual roadmap that will be released in December and finalized at the end of the year. So stakeholders will be able to submit proposed initiatives using kind of the standard online comment tool that they may be used to for all other policy initiatives. I think that should be live today on the 2024 catalog and roadmap page online. I think Brenda has dropped a link to that somewhere in the chat. And since we are starting over, if there are previously submitted initiatives that were in previous iterations of the catalog that are still relevant, we are welcoming you to resubmit those, as well as any new initiatives as well. The next slide, I'm going to go over kind of the specific questions that are part of the submission form, but in general, we're hoping to get a little bit more information than we have in previous years from the submissions, again, just to kind of help us do a better prioritization process, and to that end, more information is helpful. Let's go ahead to the next slide, please. So this is kind of an overview of the information that the ISO is asking for as part of the submission templates. First up is the issue description. This is kind of the same as what we've had in previous years, just kind of the overview of the motivation for the submission. And again, I want to emphasize what Amelia and Jillian have already emphasized. We welcome more information if you have it. It's really whatever you have, we would welcome you to submit. So it doesn't need to necessarily be fully fleshed out at this point, but whatever you have is helpful. Next up, a proposed initiative description. So to the extent possible, we'd like you to kind of discuss the proposed scope of the proposal or the proposed initiative, and describe whatever elements of the existing market design that you are proposing to address or modify. The next question, again, is also new, is a business justification question. So again, to the extent possible, we're hoping that you can include a discussion about I guess how the proposal supports ISO strategic objectives, like Sarah went over earlier today, or existing ISO initiatives, how it might impact other parties or other market participants. If the proposal is in response to a regulatory requirement, that would be relevant information here. And this is really to help the ISO and other stakeholders have as much context as possible for the prioritization process. Next is timing and urgency. Again, this is a process for discretionary policy initiatives, so if there's an urgent policy initiative, we have kind of mentioned the other venues that you have to raise that. But, to the extent possible to help with the prioritization process, I think we're just asking for whatever information you have about, potential implementation dates that are critical or necessary. Are there potential consequences to not addressing the issue within a specific time frame? Any information about that would be helpful. And then finally, we're asking for any supporting data, either data that you already have available or data you think would be helpful to kind of analyzing the issue and developing solutions and, again, helping us with that prioritization process. So we recognize that not all proposals are going to have the same amount of information available, but we're just asking to provide as much as you can. Any questions on the submission template?
I think while people are queuing up too, I wanted to just add that it will be like the normal stakeholder comment.
Right, yeah.
Web page interface.
Right.
And that you plan on posting it today.
Yes.
Actually, we just got a note, the template is live.
Yay, great.
On the ISO website. So.
Great.
All right, thanks, Brenda. Okay, next slide, please. We are not doing this slide.
Next slide.
Next slide.
There we go.
Okay, stakeholder prioritization working groups. Meg has already kind of went over our first prioritization process, which is the RIF roundtable. And this is kind of speaking more to our second prioritization working group. So maybe just a quick overview. After this February submission window closes, the ISO is going to kind of kick off their prioritization process. And our goal is to really start early with understanding stakeholder support for the submissions and the reasons for that support, which is why we're trying to do this in kind of one annual process and get it kind of all over with so it can feed into the roadmap later in the year. And we're also hoping that stakeholders can help us identify and group submissions into potential single initiatives that kind of comprise of multiple related proposals. And then this also kind of gives the ISO the opportunity to make sure that we understand all the proposals. If we have any questions, this is the time for us to reach out and clarify any proposals and to make sure we understand what you've submitted. So the timeline on this is mid-March, I think March 18. We kick off with the RIF roundtable like Meg went over. And then in April, we'll start the kind of general stakeholder working groups. And let's see. I guess we have, I think we're thinking probably one stakeholder working group. I think that's still maybe up in the air. And then the product of those working groups is going to be the draft catalog published at the end of April, likely, for a stakeholder comment. And then we'll take those comments and produce the final catalog in May. Next slide, please.
Actually, just taking a question that popped up in the chat from Colin Smith of LEAP. The question was, is the RIF for all policy priorities or just those connected to the EIM? The RIF roundtable, as Meg explained, is primarily for the RIF community, and you should participate with the sector liaison that represents your particular sector there. The overall process and the prioritization workshop that Alyssa is speaking to is for everything in the catalog and would include the entire community. We just are adding the RIF roundtable as a way of ensuring that we get feedback specifically from that broader WEIM community.
Meg, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, if I could just briefly, I agree with the answer that you just provided. If there is a topic that relates directly, obviously, to the EIM or to the real-time market, definitely raise that with your sector liaison for purposes of discussion at the roundtable. And if you're not sure where an initiative belongs or if it is ripe for discussion at the EIM roundtable, get in touch with your sector liaison and they can talk it through with you. Thanks.
Thanks, Meg.
Okay, so I just want to drill down a little bit more into what the prioritization process is going to look like. So like Sarah kind of discussed, the ISO is really trying to incorporate our internal planning processes with stakeholder needs and stakeholder priorities, and that's what we're really hoping to get out of this process. So it starts with what comes out of the RIF roundtable and the stakeholder working groups and what stakeholders identify as high priorities, and then what can possibly be grouped together into single initiatives. And then, I do want to mention that the catalog is kind of the start of the ISO initiative planning and the prioritization process. And that will be followed up by the roadmap process, which, like we've mentioned, takes place during the summer months, and then is finalized at the end of the year. And the goal is to kind of pare down the submissions that we received in February and really get a short list of high priority, kind of implementable, generally feasible initiatives that we can take back and kind of figure out how to fit into our short and medium term work plan at the ISO. So some of the other considerations that we're looking at internally is feasibility. So this is kind of a rough overall look at if the proposed objectives and the methods of the initiative are feasible and that we can realistically implement them. And this is kind of just a first glance and making sure that this is something that we can start work on and get into the catalog. And then timing and complexity is another primary consideration. I think particularly with staff resources being used on EDAM implementation over the next year, you know, we're really looking at, do we have the staff resources, the staff bandwidth to take this on and see it through from development to implementation. And then finally, like we've kind of mentioned here, urgency. We don't have the bandwidth to tackle every market design improvement, so we do have to focus on the ones that really broadly impact stakeholders and are urgent, where a failure to address the issue would have significant impacts on the market. Any questions on the kind of general prioritization criteria here?
I would just add that, we've highlighted this staff resources and the implementation of EDAM on our side. We also recognize that's a tremendous amount of work that stakeholders are undertaking as well. We're not alone in that. So there's a lot of work going on for stakeholders. So we're sensitive to, workloads all around.
Okay. All right, next slide, please. So I just want to wrap up with kind of a discussion or review of next steps. I don't think anything on here is new, but just kind of summarizing here, we've got the submission period during the month of February. Like I mentioned, that should be live on our website. If you do have any questions on that form, it should be reasonably straightforward, but of course, reach out to us about that. Then in March, the RIF Roundtable. In April, the stakeholder prioritization workshops and draft catalog, and then finishing out in May with the final catalog being published. After that, the ISO's kind of internal review prioritization begins on the roadmap. So that's all I've got for the submission process. Does anyone else have anything to add here?
If I could, I know I said this earlier, but I think it's important to draw it out maybe again, is that in those stakeholder prioritization workshops, we're really going to look forward to reaching out to some of you and have you, give us a presentation, make your case, and explain your submissions, as we try to whittle down, as Alyssa said, to the group of things that we can fit onto all of our very full plates in the roadmap over that 3-year horizon. So we'll really look forward to, your input in those prioritization workshops.
This is just waiting to see if there are any more questions. I'll just add, this is really your opportunity to tell the ISO what changes are important to you or those that you represent. And that feedback will be collected and then fed into the near-term urgent process, the more medium-term catalog process, and ultimately in the very long-term sort of strategy process. So I very much appreciate all of your participation here. That, if there are no questions, Brenda, you want to close us out a little early?
Of course. Thanks, Amelia. So one second. So for today's last steps, we're going to go ahead and open it up for the Policy Roadmap Process 2024 Initiative page here today. We do have those comments available up to the 28th. Feel free to submit those similar to the comment templates that we have submitted for the regular policy initiatives. Here our leads are for the Lisa Craig, Jillian Villager, and also Amelia. We do have any questions, feel free to send that over to myself or ISO stakeholderaffairs@CAISO.com. And then for the last few slides I have here today is that the news release for FERC accepts the ISO tariff changes for the Western day-ahead electricity market, and this new rules adopted to the day-ahead market enhancements and extended day-ahead market as well. So this link also provides anything that's stakeholder-driven, engaging through market rules and collaborative working groups that we talked today. So that's a high-level news release that we just posted a few weeks ago. And then the Energy Blog Matters today for the ISO Grid also provides our Mark Rothleader, our Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer, with the Great Transformation, as well for the conference he just attended in San Diego on January 16th to go over a lot of high-level topics, and he was a keynote speaker there, so feel free to visit that as well. But we do have a lot coming up this month and next month, so working groups are in progress. We really appreciate stakeholder feedback. Feel free to send them over to myself and our stakeholder group, and we could continue doing what we can, working together collaboratively to accomplish good things at this ISO. So with that, I don't see any more questions in queue. I'll give everyone a few seconds and moments to maybe ask a question, but send them over to myself, and the comment template is available to those questions to add on as well as attachment. And I do see Dan Williams. We'll go ahead and get Dan first.
Hey, sorry to push things out, but I stepped away from my computer for a minute. This is Dan from TEA. Can you just talk real quickly about how this process builds into the annual draft budget and budget cycle for CAISO, as far as integrating sort of the potential for these catalog items to kind of make their way into implementation, and what that means for CAISO's annual budget process?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, thanks for that question. That is part of generating the roadmap process that eventually goes to the board, will go to the board in December of this year. Anything that is on that roadmap will be considered as part of, as the ISO is putting together their budget for activities in 2025, 2026, and 2027. Also, I think, and I know I've said this a few times today, I really think understanding what's important to stakeholders helps the ISO in determining what their strategic goals should be on an even larger scale. So even if something that you're recommending doesn't end up on the catalog or doesn't end up in the roadmap, the fact that it was important enough for you to submit in this process will end up feeding into that understanding of what's important to the ISO stakeholder community, which itself informs the long-term strategy.
That was really why we wanted Sarah to come and present that part of the process to you, because they're not disconnected. They're very, very much intertwined and, you know. What was I? Oh, I would just add that, you know, I think you asked earlier, Dan, about the span of summer months and kind of what's going on during that long kind of, you know, when you look at our schedule for this process, there's sort of a pause there, a pause in our process, but it's really respecting the internal process of developing the enterprise roadmap, which in fact is, you know, very much that budgeting determination and figuring out internal workloads and all of that sort of stuff for the next 3 years, but especially for the upcoming year for 2025. So that's work that's happening in that time frame.
So within that, and thanks for that explanation, once these comments come in and there's some, you know, kind of synthesis, some discussion at the RIF, is there an opportunity for stakeholders to weigh in on sort of the ability to maybe expand what can be tackled within the stakeholder process if stakeholders are willing to support an increase in the CAISO's budget to tackle those issues? Yeah, I don't have a specific example in mind here, but just kind of the general thought of, you know, adding people can get more work done, depending on where the constraints are within the process of developing policy and performing implementation and that sort of thing. And it's kind of a question of, do we bring that into our stakeholder catalog comments, or do we bring that into the budget process once we've seen sort of where the choke points are within the catalog process?
Dan, the most effective way to bring that argument into the process is to advocate for the importance of the particular changes that you're submitting. Doing that, let's say we end this process with a catalog of 49 very important things to stakeholders. And there's a coalition, it's not your proposal, it's the proposal of the coalition of people who found that particular issue very important. That feedback ends up going back to and feeding into the ISO's longer term budgeting and resource allocation feasibility processes. You know, the larger message gets communicated back that there's a lot of change that needs to be made, and it needs to be made in a thoughtful manner, and we'll need, as an organization, to have the resources, including staff, available to do that. So I wouldn't make the meta argument in that case. I'd make the multiple narrower arguments. I think if we come back with a catalog that has a lot of discretionary but very important initiatives, that sends a very strong signal.
Good stuff. Thanks.
I see a question from Colin. Okay.
Well, first, quick thank you for giving this presentation, putting together this new process. I'm very excited to be able to engage in this year. A quick question, and coming off of what you just discussed regarding, policy prioritizations and sort of policies and priorities for the specific industries at large. Is it possible to submit joint comments with other entities within a specific industry to create a sort of larger industry proposal? Or would you prefer that, different entities within an industry just submit their own individual comments, and then you'll on your end kind of aggregate them and determine whether or not they are sort of more industry-wide?
My personal preference is for you, if possible, to submit those as an industry group. If you can agree on a common statement, we will take separate submissions, and we will try to group them together on our end, so that if we see that there's sort of a common set of requests, we'll group them together on our side. But if you can preemptively do that, that's even better. With that, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for your participation in the process, and thanks to Candace for hosting the call.
All righty. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Candace, for help me with facilitation of this meeting. We definitely enjoy all those comments. This recording will be posted about 3 to 5 business days, and then we will be having that video posted on this website for the reoccurring stakeholder processes under the Annual Policy Initiatives Roadmap Process 2024. Make sure those comment templates are posted so we can see them at a timely manner. You do have an extended timeline, so February 28th will be the last day. But other than that, let's go ahead and close this conference call, and thanks everyone for joining us.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Inteller Events. You may now disconnect.